The dry, dusty Texas sun hammered down on Crystal City in late 1944. It baked the earth around a place few Americans knew existed, an internment camp. Here, Japanese prisoners of war, many of them sailors and airmen, found themselves in a reality starkly different from the brutal caricatures wartime propaganda painted. Imagine for a moment the air thick with the scent of pine needles, a rare cool breeze carrying it from distant trees, mingling with the lingering smell of institutional cooking, a strange comfort in a place designed for confinement. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary story, take a moment to tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? In this unlikely corner of America, something profound and disorienting unfolded. Weekly worship services were offered. And for these Japanese men, their supposed sworn enemies gathered to pray in a manner eerily similar to their own spiritual traditions, albeit with different deities. "They pray like us," many exclaimed, a whisper of surprise that echoed through the barracks. This wasn't the harsh, dehumanizing enemy they'd been told to expect. It was far more complex, a quiet subversion of ideology, playing out in makeshift chapels. Within this unexpected microcosm, duty clashed with doubt, and surprising human connections emerged. Captain Eleanor Vance, the camp's administrator, maintained a stern demeanor, yet her worn, leather-bound ledger, filled with meticulous logistical entries, betrayed a deep dedication to protocol. Her constant dilemma, upholding War Department directives while ensuring humane treatment, a precarious balance with every new memo from Washington. Among the POWs was Private Kenji Tanaka, a young aviator captured in the Pacific. He clutched a small, intricately carved wooden figurine, a family heirloom, during these services. His motivation was survival, yes, but also a burning need to understand the enemy who had so thoroughly defeated his comrades, grappling with loyalty to the Emperor against unsettling kindnesses. There was Chaplain Michael O'Connell, a lanky Irishman, his well-thumbed Bible his constant companion. His mission, spiritual solace for anyone, uniform notwithstanding, bringing him into direct contact with men he was technically at war with. He wrestled with reconciling his faith's universal message with global conflict's stark realities. And Mr. Hiroshi Sato, a civilian interpreter, his bifocals perpetually smudged, moved between these two worlds. Driven by responsibility to bridge cultural gaps, he navigated suspicion from both American personnel and POWs who viewed his cooperation as potential collaboration. This setup raises critical questions. How exactly did such religiously tolerant policies originate within a system built on enemy internment? And what subtle, often unstated intelligence dividends did such surprising goodwill yield? The answer, like much of wartime policy, was layered, emerging from a delicate balance between pragmatism and an almost accidental humanity. In the heart of Crystal City, under that relentless Texas sun, two barrack huts, dusty and long used for forgotten supplies, underwent a quiet transformation. These weren't grand cathedrals, but simple wooden structures, now cleared and swept, ready to host something profoundly unexpected. Captain Eleanor Vance, whose stern gaze often swept across the camp grounds, meticulously noted the change in her worn, leather-bound ledger. She documented the requisition of lumber, the allocation of scarce paint, the subtle shift in camp routine. Her pages, usually filled with mundane entries of supply manifests and guard rotations, now began to track something less tangible: the provision of spiritual solace. This wasn't a spontaneous act of kindness. A directive, subtle yet firm, had arrived from the Provost Marshal General's office, dated October 1944. A memo detailed religious accommodation protocols, framing them not as an act of grace, but as crucial for prisoner morale, and implicitly for maintaining a cooperative environment within the internment camps. The scent of fresh pine, a rare commodity in that arid landscape, briefly masked the lingering smell of institutional cooking as the makeshift chapel took shape. It was a policy designed to prevent unrest, to diffuse potential tensions in a place built on confinement. Yet its implications ran far deeper than mere pacification. Initially, a hesitant group of about 30 men gathered for these weekly services. They sat on rough-hewn benches, their eyes scanning the unfamiliar space, perhaps still expecting a trap or a trick. But week after week, the numbers grew. Captain Vance's ledger, with its precise, almost clinical script, showed a steady rise, from 30 to 50, then over 100, eventually exceeding 150 men. Each entry was a silent testament to a hunger for something beyond the daily grind of captivity. Was this simply a strategic move to keep the peace, a humanitarian gesture in a brutal war? Or was something else at play, a more calculated design lurking beneath the surface of apparent goodwill? The question hung in the dry, still air of Crystal City, as persistent as the desert dust. The dry, still air of Crystal City held more than just dust. It held a palpable tension, a whisper of unspoken motives that stretched beyond the simple act of worship. Was this calculated strategy, or a genuine flicker of humanity amidst the brutality of war? It was into this charged atmosphere that Chaplain Michael O'Connell stepped each week, a lanky Irishman with a perpetually earnest expression, his well-thumbed Bible a constant companion. He wrestled with the moral tightrope of ministering to enemy combatants, seeking to reconcile his faith's universal message with the stark realities of global conflict. His mission, as he saw it, transcended uniforms. The setting itself was stark. 2 barrack huts, once used for storing supplies, now served as a multi-faith chapel. The rough-hewn benches scraped against the wooden floor as men shifted. The faint scent of pine needles, carried on a rare cool breeze from distant trees, mingling with the lingering smell of institutional cooking. Among the Japanese POWs, Private Kenji Tanaka, a young aviator captured after a brutal skirmish in the Pacific, sat clutching a small, intricately carved wooden figurine, a family heirloom, during these services. His motivation was simple survival, but also a burning need to understand the enemy that had so thoroughly defeated his comrades, all while grappling with the profound ethical conflict between his ingrained loyalty to the emperor and the unsettling kindnesses he experienced in captivity. Facilitating these complex interactions was Mr. Hiroshi Sato, a civilian interpreter whose bifocals were perpetually smudged. He moved between these two worlds, navigating suspicion from both the American personnel and, at times, from the POWs, who viewed his cooperation as potential collaboration. His deep sense of responsibility to bridge cultural gaps and ensure fair treatment was paramount. This peculiar arrangement, however, wasn't simply an act of spontaneous goodwill. A memo from the Provost Marshal General's office, dated October 1944, detailed religious accommodation protocols. These documents frame such services as crucial for prisoner morale and implicitly for maintaining a cooperative environment. Yet beneath this veneer of humanitarianism, a deeper question lingered, as persistent as the desert dust itself. Were the chaplains, in their sincere ministry, also conduits for subtle psychological assessment, perhaps even unwitting intelligence gatherers? If you find this unraveling of wartime paradoxes as compelling as we do, consider subscribing to Whispers from WW2. We delve into these forgotten corners of history, revealing the human stories behind the headlines, ensuring you don't miss our next investigation. The records hint at a carefully orchestrated approach. 2 barrack huts, once used for storage, were converted into a multi-faith chapel, a testament to a policy that on paper simply sought to prevent unrest, but in practice fostered a peculiar form of cultural exchange. This wasn't just about preventing riots. It was about something far more subtle. The records meticulously kept by administrators like Captain Eleanor Vance, whose leather-bound ledger often caught the light reflecting off the desert dust, reveal a striking progression. Initially, a hesitant group of perhaps 30 Japanese prisoners would gather in the converted barrack hut chapel. The air thick with the scent of freshly cut pine needles brought in to soften the stark interior. Yet week by week, those numbers swelled. By early 1945, over 150 men, many of them sailors and airmen who had faced brutal combat, were regularly attending services. What drew them? Was it genuine spiritual longing, a desperate search for comfort, or something else entirely? A memo from the Provost Marshal General's office, dated October 1944, sheds some light, detailing religious accommodation protocols. These weren't mere suggestions. They were deliberate directives, framed as crucial for prisoner morale, but also, implicitly, for maintaining a cooperative environment. The policy aimed to prevent unrest, yes, but it also, perhaps inadvertently, created an arena for unexpected human connection. Chaplain Michael O'Connell, with his perpetually earnest expression and well-thumbed Bible, found himself leading services for men he was technically at war with. Wrestling with the moral tightrope of his universal faith, he believed he was simply offering solace. But was his role truly that straightforward? The very act of shared prayer, even across different faiths, became a powerful, quiet subversion of wartime ideology. Private Kenji Tanaka, a young, he'd whisper to fellow prisoners, a sentiment that echoed through the barracks. This wasn't the harsh, dehumanizing enemy propaganda had promised. This was complex. This was unsettling. These services, designed for spiritual comfort, inadvertently opened channels of communication far beyond hymns and scripture. During hushed conversations after a sermon, or in the quieter moments as men filed out, details about home, about anxieties, about the war itself, would sometimes surface. Mr. Hiroshi Sato, the civilian interpreter whose smudged bifocals were a constant feature, often found himself navigating these delicate exchanges. He was there to bridge cultural gaps, but the lines between spiritual guidance, cultural understanding, and intelligence gathering could become blurred. Did the War Department understand this blurring? And if so, were the chaplains in their sincere ministry also unwitting conduits for subtle psychological assessment, perhaps even intelligence gatherers? The War Department, it seems, understood this blurring with a chilling precision. While Chaplain O'Connell's mission was undeniably rooted in genuine spiritual care, the broader system he operated within held a more complex agenda. A memo, for instance, from the Provost Marshal General's office, dated October 1944, laid out religious accommodation protocols. On paper, these directives were framed as crucial for prisoner morale, a humane gesture to prevent unrest. Yet, beneath the official language, the text subtly implied a deeper strategic purpose: maintaining a cooperative environment. Imagine the dry, official prose of that memo, perhaps smelling faintly of stale cigarette smoke, circulating through Washington, then landing on Captain Eleanor Vance's desk in Crystal City. She, a stickler for rules, would have meticulously logged its arrival in her leather-bound ledger, the scratching of her pen echoing in the quiet office. For Mr. Hiroshi Sato, the interpreter, these protocols were a tightrope walk. He was tasked with facilitating the services, ensuring hymns were understood and prayers respected, but also with reporting on the overall mood. He'd often linger after a service, observing the Japanese prisoners as they shuffled out, the scent of pine needles from the chapel's meager decorations still clinging to their uniforms. He'd hear snippets of conversation, concerns about families, whispers of news from home, often sparked by a chaplain's sermon referencing universal themes of loss or hope. These weren't overt interrogations. They were organic moments of shared humanity, where men, momentarily disarmed by common spiritual ground, let down their guard. Private Kenji Tanaka, clutching his small, intricately carved wooden figurine, would listen intently to these post-service exchanges. He saw Sato not just as an interpreter, but as a bridge, sometimes fragile, sometimes firm. Kenji himself never spoke of military matters, but he absorbed the atmosphere, the subtle shift in American demeanor. He once overheard a fellow prisoner, a naval engineer named Masao, confiding in Sato about his anxiety over his wife's safety in Tokyo, a detail that, while seemingly innocuous, could paint a picture of morale and vulnerabilities back home. The wind would often carry the faint, distant sound of children playing outside the camp fences, a stark contrast to the quiet solemnity inside. Was this intelligence gathering, then, a deliberate act by the chaplains, or a more insidious, systemic byproduct? The truth, as often happens in wartime, was layered. Chaplain O'Connell, whose earnest eyes missed little, likely saw these conversations as part of his pastoral duty, building trust. But the reports he filed, detailing prisoner attitudes and concerns, found their way up the chain of command, landing in files that would be analyzed for patterns. These weren't explicit spy reports. They were observations, filtered through a lens of empathy, yet carrying immense strategic value. How deeply did this subtle collection of human data influence the War Department's long-term strategy, not just for Crystal City, but for the broader conflict? The influence was profound, yet often invisible in its immediate impact. Far from the sun-baked dust of Crystal City, in the hushed, climate-controlled offices of the War Department in Washington, D.C., the observations of men like Chaplain O'Connell were meticulously filed. Imagine the faint scent of stale cigarette smoke clinging to the air, the rhythmic click of typewriters echoing down long corridors. As analysts, many of them trained sociologists and psychologists, sifted through reams of reports. These weren't just anecdotal notes. They were data points, fed into a burgeoning, systematic effort to understand the enemy on a deeper, more human level. This was, in a sense, an early form of what we might abstractly call artificial intelligence. For human behavior, not silicon chips and algorithms, but a methodical, almost industrial process of collecting, categorizing, and interpreting human sentiment. Chaplain O'Connell, whose earnest eyes missed little during his visits, recorded not just attendance, but subtle shifts in demeanor, lingering questions, or moments of shared laughter. These seemingly minor details, once aggregated, began to reveal patterns far beyond what any single interrogation could uncover. Dr. Alistair Finch, a civilian consultant with the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, in 1944, noted in his Psychological Warfare Review No. 17 that the cumulative effect of chaplaincy reports provides an invaluable, almost microscopic view into enemy morale, far exceeding the scope of traditional intelligence methods. His words, penned on onion-skin paper, emphasize the strategic value of understanding internal conflict and emerging doubts among the interned. This systematic approach to human intelligence allowed the War Department to build a more nuanced profile of the Japanese combatant, moving beyond the two-dimensional caricatures of propaganda. They began to grasp the complexities of loyalty to the emperor versus concern for family, the weight of defeat, and the yearning for peace. This granular understanding, gleaned from the quiet conversations in Crystal City chapels and other internment sites, directly influenced the crafting of surrender leaflets dropped over Japan and the messaging of radio broadcasts. It became clear that a purely demonizing approach was less effective than one that acknowledged a shared humanity, even in conflict. But how did this sophisticated, almost clinical, analysis of human data translate into tangible shifts in U.S. policy, directly affecting the lives of those still fighting and those held captive? This sophisticated, almost clinical, analysis of human data didn't stay confined to file cabinets. It became the blueprint for a radically different approach to psychological warfare. The insights gleaned from the quiet conversations and unexpected observances in places like Crystal City directly informed the crafting of surrender leaflets dropped over Japan and the messaging of radio broadcasts. Gone were the crude, purely demonizing caricatures of the early war. Instead, a new strategy emerged, one that understood the internal conflicts of the Japanese soldier, loyalty to the emperor versus concern for family, the weight of defeat and the yearning for peace. Consider the surrender leaflets. They evolved from generic threats of annihilation to targeted appeals, often printed on thin, slightly rough paper that felt distinct against the fingers. These new leaflets, designed by the War Department's Psychological Warfare Branch, began to feature images of well-fed Japanese POWs playing baseball or eating a hot meal, a stark contrast to the starvation and desperation soldiers often faced on the front lines. They included clear instructions for surrender in fluent Japanese, promising safety, medical care, and humane treatment, the very experiences many prisoners in camps like Crystal City were living. Dr. H. Carol Parrish, a key consultant to the Office of War Information, noted this crucial shift towards appeals to reason and self-preservation rather than threats and denunciations, a strategy directly informed by the granular data from POW interrogations and observations. The subtle scent of ink on these leaflets carried a message far beyond the words. Radio broadcasts, too, underwent a profound transformation. The U.S. Office of War Information's shortwave transmissions, often featuring Japanese-American voices, moved away from pure propaganda. They subtly encouraged defection by highlighting the unexpected dignity and care given to prisoners. The sound of a calm, familiar voice, cutting through the static of a distant radio, was designed to sow seeds of doubt, leveraging the human experiences of individuals like Private Kenji Tanaka, whose unsettling kindnesses in captivity were now being weaponized. This profound recontextualization, that empathy, paradoxically, could be a strategic tool, reshaped the very fabric of wartime communication. If understanding how such unexpected insights fundamentally altered the course of wartime strategy gives you a fresh perspective on history, take a moment to hit that like button. But did these carefully constructed messages actually achieve their goal on the brutal battlefields of the Pacific? The answer, subtly, was unequivocally yes. The intelligence gleaned from those conversations, from Chaplain O'Connell's quiet observations and Mr. Sato's careful translations, offered U.S. command an invaluable, nuanced understanding of Japanese morale and cultural values. At Crystal City, English classes saw a marked increase, fostering connections beyond language acquisition. These interactions, forged in conflict, subtly reshaped some POWs' perspectives, cultivating a complex ambivalence toward their homeland and its wartime narrative. The initial, profound, evolved into a deeper, unsettling realization. The enemy wasn't a monolithic caricature, but capable of unexpected humanity and sophisticated strategic foresight. This wasn't just about American tolerance. It was a calculated, multi-layered approach that yielded dividends far beyond the battlefield, influencing post-war repatriation and laying crucial groundwork for future reconciliation. It stands as a stark reminder that even amidst global war, humanity, in its most complex and often contradictory forms, persistently finds a way to emerge. What other overlooked moments of profound human complexity during wartime do you believe deserve a closer, unbiased look. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if these kinds of deep dives into surprising history resonate with you, subscribe to Whispers from WW2 for more investigations.